All right. Hello and welcome to the Sprint 40 review. We do these things every 3 weeks like clockwork, it seems, so that's pretty cool. The sprint has been focused on Darga stabilization. Next slide, please. So as usual, I'll talk about the sprint statistics. Gregg Blomquist will update us on providers. Dan will update us on the UI. Greg T will update us on platform, Alberto on the REST API, Greg M on automate, and Dennis on performance. Next slide, please. All right, so this sprint, we had 330 pull requests merged in the main repo. Out of the 330, 183 were bugs. So it's a little more than half, a little less than a quarter were enhancements, and the rest of the stuff was tech debt and refactoring and tests. So a pretty good mix, but as I mentioned last sprint, more tilted towards bug fixes. Next slide, please. Out of those 183 bugs that were fixed in upstream master, 172 of them were backported to Darga. So, I don't know, between a half and 3/4, there was that 5/8 were bug fixes, 52 were enhancements, and 17 were technical debt. So like a really good mix. And I expect this next sprint, which is focused on continued Darga stabilization, to even tilt more heavily, have more red and less blue there as we go forward. More bugs, less enhancements in terms of percentages. Next slide. So the PR breakdown, this is just for master. We didn't do the same thing for Darga. But as you can see there, providers had almost half of the pull requests. I don't see the UI there on the screen, but usually UI is kind of a big hitter there as well. So it's a pretty typical mix. And inside the provider land there on the bottom right, really nothing stands out anymore, which is except for the 21 there, which is containers. But it's really starting to kind of show a healthy spread in the mix of pull requests that were merged. Next slide, please. All right, this is a sprint comparison, and finally I'm starting to see a pattern of some sort. If you look, sprint 31 is kind of like sprint 39. That was the feature lockdown before the Capablanca. Sprint 31 was the feature lockdown before the Capablanca release. Sprint 39 is feature lockdown before Darga release. Sprint 32 was the first stabilization for Capablanca. Sprint 40 is the first stabilization for Darga. You kind of see they kind of look pretty similar. So we'll see kind of if sprint 33 looks like sprint 41. And once we can sense a pattern, maybe we can start using it to our advantage of some sort. Next slide, please. So besides the main repo, ManageIQ, we had 33 other pull requests merged in various repos: Ansible, Azure, Overt Metrics, VertFS, the docs, the website, the appliance build, the self-service UI, really all over the place. So really, I'm seeing like a very healthy mix here of kind of requests across the board. You know, in different feature areas and different repos, it's really a healthy balance here. Next slide, please. All right. As for Darga, the release candidate we will be making this week. The next sprint, sprint 41, is going to be focused on the final stabilization for Darga, when we plan to release Darga in June. And also, I think we have to start voting for the e-release, to name the e-release, which I'm hoping to finalize at the ManageIQ Summit, which is coming up the week of June 6th here in Mahwah, New Jersey. Yeah, so look for the talk topic that's coming soon. Next slide, please. And over to Gregg Blomquist.
All right. So in this sprint, we're going to talk about some updates to to OpenStack, containers, Google Cloud Engine, VMware, and Alyssa is going to give she's going to talk about the updates to Hawkular, which is our middleware provider. Also, you probably can tell I have a bit of a cold, so you might have to bear with me a little bit. Next slide. All right, the OpenStack integration team knocked out a lot of bug fixes this sprint, but there were also a couple features I wanted to highlight. First off, Marek added the ability for OpenStack services to be enabled and disabled via the OpenStack API. Previously, we could only present the status of OpenStack services, but now this opens up this larger opportunity in terms of OpenStack management. Also, Ladislav added the ability to indicate the Keystone domain ID when you're adding an OpenStack provider to ManageIQ. And before we could, we would just simply connect to the default domain. And this is just a step in the direction of having full domain support for OpenStack in ManageIQ. So that should be coming later, I think. Next slide. On the container side, Zahi added persistent volume claims to ManageIQ. And in the Kubernetes world, persistent volume claims, the way that they indicate that a persistent volume is requested by a user. So in the screenshot, we can see a persistent volume with the claim that's been made against it. Next slide. So Joe from the Google Cloud Engine team added support for event capture and processing for the Google Cloud Engine provider. And as most of you know, events are this crucial part of the whole kind of provider integration picture. So this is really exciting to me. Joe also added several pull requests that help better identify the OS on different Google Cloud Engine VMs. Next slide. So for VMware, I'm going to try not to steal the thunder from Gregg M regarding distributed switches, but I'll just say that James on the providers team added support to collect distributed switches in the VMware inventory. Just call it a teaser trailer, let's say. Now I'll hand it over to Alyssa to talk about the work from the middleware team. Next slide.
Hi everyone. So we have several new features, enhancements, and bug fixes that enter this milestone. Next slide, please. The first one would be the live metrics, which is a new feature that was added by Lucas, which captures the metrics of a middleware server on demand directly from Hawkular. And so what is unique about the live metrics feature is that they are not stored in ManageIQ database, and hence there is no need to enable the capping in workers for this feature. Next slide, please. On the timeline, Jay added links to the provider and the relevant entity in the event details pop-up. Next slide, please. To be aligned with the rest of the providers, configuration of the default views for all of the middleware entities were added by Alex. Next slide, please. Jirka added the data sources as a new entity in ManageIQ, and its addition to topology is not ready yet, but it will be added shortly as well. Next slide, please. And we also had several more enhancements and bug fixes. The topology was rewritten by Alex to reuse the generic topology, similar to containers and network topologies. We added more unit tests around topology, and also several bug fixes were merged, mostly around removing not implemented and irrelevant features and screens from the UI. So thank you very much, all the middleware team, for all the continuous work, and back to you, Gregg.
All right. Thanks, Alyssa. I'll just hand it right over to Dan.
Sounds good. All right, so on the user interface side, you can see kind of the trend is the same here, following along with a lot more bugs. We did get some work done on the self-service UI with some features we were trying to get in the previous sprint, but we finally got them in. So there are some enhancements in the user interface still. Hopefully, won't have very many of those in the next sprint, if any. Next slide. So on the new functionality enhancements, the first four are containers. I got these late, so I don't have slides for them. Sorry about that, but definitely can go through them. They added the persistent volume claims and the UI for that. Also added policy sets, policy contents and conditions seeds for that. So there's some out-of-the-box stuff. Auto tagging, that's really done on the back end for Kubernetes. Some labels there, and then an action also to annotate the container images that aren't secure with OpenShift. So that's came in from the container side. On OpenStack, I just noticed a PR came through. Actually, it was a while in work there going on for a while, and basically some management of cloud volumes. And I've got a screenshot for that so we can see that. In Ansible, this is where we slipped one of the features, and we have one more piece we're going to try to get in the next sprint. So that is one feature that should be added. But we've got the inventories and configured systems UI in the self-service UI. We restyled the navigation bar. Also added console support. We have a new console proxy implementation. We're using both in the operations UI and in the self-service UI. I've got a quick demo of that. The shopping cart got in. This is a biggie. We're trying to get this in so that you can actually order multiple services at the same time in a shopping cart kind of metaphor. And then Heiko's going to go over the new development tool that he added into the product called Totally. Next slide. All right, so the OpenStack Cloud Volumes, I think this really does represent, this one slide actually represents most of the work that was done here. You can attach, detach them, create them, edit and delete them with the Cloud Volumes. So this was looks like a pretty big amount of work in the OpenStack area. Next slide. So on the Ansible side, we have inventories and configured systems. So I wish I could see this. Looking closer. So anyway, yeah, this is where you see the inventory groups. And if we go to the next slide, within those groups, we can see the configured systems under there now, and we can actually drill into those on the next slide and actually see a summary for that. All right, so like I said, there's one more set of UI that's got to go in next sprint. Next slide. Self-service UI, we just updated the navigation style to match the operations UI, so they look the same. Looks pretty nice, actually. It separates it out and makes it match real well. Next slide. All right, so inside the self-service UI now, we have the support for HTML5 consoles. You can see there's a button there, and if you hover over it, it tells you can open the HTML5 console. And I have a quick demo here. The console support especially in that self-service UI, because we're using the REST API, we had to get new REST API endpoints for that. It's in, but it's tricky to set up still, and we still have a few probably bugs to iron out. So this demo, let me share my screen. This demo actually was kind of tough to make. Just so you know, okay, here we go. Alrighty, I think I'm sharing. Let me know if you can see the demo there.
Yeah, it just came up.
Okay, great. So this is really quick. I'm going to talk about it a little ahead of time here because it goes by. It's only about 30 seconds long. So basically, we find a service that has a console that we can actually get to. You'll note that it's called Windows service, but the Windows has a driver issue with Spice. So it will actually show up upside down. So, but that's not our issue. That's a known Spice issue on the Windows drivers. So Martin added a Linux VM to the service, and we'll actually connect to that. So here we go. He's going to find that service first and go into it and look at it. And you'll see there the console buttons at the bottom. I'm going to find one of those and pop it open. Notice it says it's getting ready. Open up the console. and it should pop up in a new window with the Spice console into that virtual machine. So now you can connect to the virtual machines under your service and use their consoles. We'll iron out some of the fixes in the next sprint. We wanted to get this in as a feature though. Okay, and I've got another demo of the shopping cart, which is my next slide, but we won't go back to that. I'll just go right to the demo here. Let's get to that demo. All right, so let me pause it here for a second. Let me go full screen on this one. Okay, there we go. So you guys see the self-service UI login?
Yep.
All right, I assume we do. Okay, so here we go. I'll play this. And so basically we're gonna log into the self-service UI. And we're gonna go into our shopping cart and see that there's nothing there. So we now have a shopping cart up on the top right. You go to your catalog, look for a service that you want to order. Right, and now at this point, when you're putting it into the cart, you actually would run through the dialogues to define, the answers to the questions that define your service. So now you can see that we have that item in the catalog or in the shopping cart. You can go back and order something else. I think Aparna found something with a few more questions on the dialogue. And yes, because the dialogue is taking a little bit longer to come up. There we go. Okay, so you can, again, configure your service the way you're going to want it. Once you get that done, you want to add that to the shopping cart. Oops, not quite done. There we go. Add that to the shopping cart. So now you can see we've got a couple items in there. We're going to add another one. But whereas before you would have to order each of these separately and run through the order process and put in their request, you can now kind of stack them up. The shopping cart will stay around. It will be persistent. It should be there when you come back if you were to log out and come back, so you can kind of build up your cart and come back to it later if you want. It looks like we're adding one more. And then, of course, you have you can manipulate your card. If you have something in there that you don't want anymore, you can take it out. But once it's all complete and the way you want it, you can place your order. Shopping cart was successfully ordered, and now you'll see the requests in the request screen. So you'll see the 3 pending approvals. There is one more step we're going to take with this, and you should be able to see previous orders. So that we'll look for that coming. That's like a minor addendum to this piece. All right, get back here. Let me, can we get back to the slides? Marianne, can you take those back? Okay, so next slide, which I think is the demo for the shopping cart. Okay, and then the next slide, I think, Heiko, are you on? You can be able to describe these slides?
Yes, so thanks, Dan.
Sure.
We have a new tiny developer tool called Totally, and the idea is to improve the accessibility of the ManageIQ UI. And on each of the pages in developer mode, you will find some small glasses in the bottom left corner. And if you click on them, you get this overlay box, so like a menu that you see here on the left side, which says headings, contrast, and so on. And when you now click on the contrast, as we have seen here, all the elements will be judged if the contrast is good or not. And you see, for example, that the heading middleware providers has a good contrast, which is okay. But the hamburger in the ManageIQ menu on the top left, or the ManageIQ wording, has a too low contrast. And what's cool is in this pop-up box that says contrast, there's even a preview for a changed setting, so you can directly judge how a change for better contrast and better accessibility would look like. Next slide, please. So this one is for images. Images are supposed to have all the native text. So for people with screen readers, they can't see that there is a shadow man on the image or VMware logo, or that the image says 15 VMs or 15 hosts below it. So one should set an alternative text, and here you can click on this and you see all these violations like in the quad icon. And the good thing is with this Totally tool, it's completely non-intrusive, but it's there when you need it, when you create a new screen. You can just fire it up in development mode, inspect if the screen is good or not, and then make the changes until they match. Okay, then back to you, Dan. Thank you.
And actually, we're down at the UI, so on to Gregg Tanzillo.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Okay, so on the platform side, we have a bunch of enhancements and bug fixes. The new replication, some work has been done on tenancy. Actually have some work on the expressions. MIQ expression hasn't been touched in a while, getting some love there. The overt metrics gem and chargeback. So last sprint I mentioned that we had tiered rates but we weren't ready to do a demo, so I promised one for this sprint, so you're going to get that. Alvaro De La Luz on Sergio's team is actually going to talk over that demo. And of course, I always leave the rest for Alberto. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually has to do with the bug that we found with the new replication, pretty significant thing that we've discovered in testing. And the gist of it is that for PG Logical, the schema really matters a lot. So the regional and global databases have to have identical schemas. And you're probably wondering, well, how could they be different, or how could they go off? So there's a couple of different ways. One way is that if migrations are run out of order, and the way that could happen is if you have a release, a bunch of migrations, and then in the next release you have a migration with a timestamp that's older than one of the migrations in the previous release. And that happens when you might have a migration in a PR that's out for a long time and it finally gets merged. You'll actually add the columns to the table, whatever table it is, with that migration, and those columns would go at the end of the table. So that would actually mess up. Normally, if you ran all the migrations from 0 on up, you'd get them in consecutive order. So there's a write-up on it in the last bullet, so everybody should take a look at that, that Nick did, as well as Nick added a bunch of specs to validate the schema, and there's information on that write-up about what you can do if tests fail because of that, either renaming your migration or other things. Yes, that's a pretty significant thing. I guess the other thing I forgot to mention is that the other way they got out of order, there was a change in Rails 5 with the way it creates polymorphic columns. It was flipping the type and ID columns. Okay, next.
That write-up is a talk topic?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And that's actually a link on the slide. That's why it's on the slide. Okay. So on the tenancy side, a little bit of work. Well, it's a lot of work. It's a little bit, as far as the slide goes, it's just a couple bullets, but a lot of work by Chris A. Moving filters down into the entitlement model. I think on Sprint 38 review, I mentioned that he was working on splitting out entitlements from MIQ group, and he kind of got the base work for that done there. But this was a pretty big PR, a lot of change. And it's a big enabler for getting supporting sharing entitlements across tenants, which is ultimately where we want to go with this.
And the entitlement stuff, that's not slated for Dargo, that's slated for the e-release, right?
That's right. Yep. Okay, next slide. So we have some work going on with MIQ expression, and Tim and Yuri have been working on doing some refactoring, creating new tests. There's a lot of code in MIQ expression that wasn't covered with tests. So, as we do some work and refactor the code, we want to make sure we have the tests to back that stuff up. And Tim has been doing ongoing work to rework the way we build SQL in the class to use Errol. So the way it works now, it's literally building SQL statements, by constructing strings for that. Got us to where we are now, but this is going to be a lot better. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this was a pretty important fix as well. The overt metrics gem had stopped working once we switched to Rails 5. The reason being that the overt DB works on Postgres 8.4, pretty old, and Rails 5 has a requirement for Postgres 9.1 or higher. So when you have the gem in an application that's running in Rails 5, it will not allow the connection to the database that's running 8.4. And for the metrics, we go right to the database for that. So actually, pretty quick turnaround by Chris A. to get that all fixed up. He's actually able to create a custom legacy adapter inside the gem to handle the connection to the overt metrics database without affecting any of the rest of the application on Rails 5. So nice work there. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'll turn it over to Alberto. Let me get that going. Oh, it already started. Okay, Alberto, are you on? Awesome.
Hello.
Okay, I'm going to start the video.
Okay. That demo is about the tier rating. Okay. As we can see, we can now add a chargeback rate with full description. We set the currency. That was an improvement previously released by our team. And basically, what we have now is that we can add rates based on tires and ranges. Before we cannot do that. And now we can define a range and set different types of rates for each tire. We can now add a fixed and a variable value. And that doesn't exist before, so we think that is a good improvement and gives more powerful and flexible tool. Okay, as we can see here is an error. Okay, this is because you can see that the rates must be in a range of values that make sense. For example, from 0 to 50 and 50 to infinity, for example. Okay, so the error previously showed was about an incomplete range. Okay, and basically we are adding tires for different ranges, and this is very different about we had before. We only had one type of rate. We have no tires, so we think we are getting this functionality more power. And we are working now in some improvements in the UI. We think that will increase the user experience. We're now adding some kebab buttons in for the actions, and well, we think it would be a cool functionality when it is over. It's over. Okay. Yeah. Well, if you click on the right, you can see the details at a glance. Okay. And the other thing we have been working on is report generation. Okay. On different types of currency. For example, we select a rate, we make a copy. The selected rate is in pounds. We make a copy of that and we change the currency. So we have now test report number 3. Okay. And finally, we assign the new rate to generate the required report in the new type of currency. We navigate into reports. We put it in the queue. Okay, that's it. We put it in the queue, and well, that's it. Okay, we hold on a sec until it's ready. We refresh it, and as we can see, okay, Okay, that's it. Yeah, we click on it, and we can see the new report based on the new currency. So, well, these are the features we have been working since last spring, and well, that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Alvaro. And thanks, everybody, for working on it. I think I said that in the last sprint. It's been a real team effort. LJ,
Okay,
Lee
thank
Moore,
you very
and
much.
guys on the Clarizio team. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Let me stop sharing my screen. We can go back to the slides. Okay, and on to Alberto for the rest.
So on the API side, we had some bug fixes that went in the sprint, but here I'll talk about the enhancements. So the versioning for the API bumped up to 2.3.0-3 for post-Darga for the e-release. So the next couple of enhancements that Tim did, so we added the role identifiers for the gets. So previously, you got the results from gets that were RBAC filtered properly, but that did not check the actual user's role. So right now, with this enhancement, you will get a 403 if you're not authorized to do that search, similar to the UI will not show it to you here. You'll get a 403 before even the RBAC stuff. So that's a good enhancement. The next, the big one that Tim worked, also quite close with Martin H. and Gregg M. So we added the shopping cart support. So there's a new collection called API Service Orders. So that will be the primary entry point for accessing the shopping cart and the different flavors I'll talk about. But for a shopping cart, we added ability to fetch a shopping cart by alphanumeric ID, specifically cart, because a user has one and only one real shopping cart, and that's controlled by the user and tenant. So you can query it by name, cart, or its individual ID. And for a shopping cart, you can query the individual service requests that are under there. So that's a formal sub-collection. So querying the service orders here, you can do the gets, and then you'll get what the authenticator user has requested. You can query by the shopping cart reference, the alphanumeric, or by its ID. And by ID, you can access the other ones, like the wish lists or the ones that were previously ordered. Next slide, please. All right, so as far as adding something to the shopping cart, it's a standard post to API service orders. As far as the content, you'll see the service requests sub-collection. And this is similar to ordering a service via the REST API where you send in the dialog fields and values. But in addition here, you'll see the service template href, because you could be ordering from the different catalogs, and that kind of gears us to doing the right stuff on the back end. Let's see. So the posts here, again, if there is no shopping cart for that user, it will be created. But if there is one, we will automatically do the append magic. So, next slide, please. Alrighty. So some additional controls here. So you can also add and remove individual requests from a shopping cart by having the add and remove actions on the sub-collection service requests. You can delete the whole shopping cart by doing the delete action or the HTTP method, clearing all the items in the shopping cart via the clear method, or just ordering what's in there with the order method. Next slide, please. Alrighty. Another enhancements that was needed for specifically the the console support. So we needed to expose the VMs as a formal sub-collection for services because we needed a single query to be able to get additional attributes. So you'll see here on the second example, for example, API services ID, expanding the VM sub-collection, but then asking for individual attributes beyond that. So that's one enhancement that went in. Also, Martin H. did another enhancements where similarly we can also access the decorators of the model resources, and in this case, that's being used for the supports console, as you see at the last example here. Next slide, please. And off to
Alberto. So, like most teams, we've worked on bug fixes and some performance improvements in the sprint, but two enhancements came in. The first one around automate for retirement. The previous logic was at the end of retirement, we were deleting the instance out of the database, which would obviously blow away the historical information we had collected about that. So we changed that the delete from VMDB state right now is still populated but commented out. So if you want to retain that logic, it's easy enough to restore it. But the feedback was really that we wanted to retain that, especially the historical information, and let the user decide if they need that or not. And then just on the service modeling side, we enabled the account model, which from the VM exposes really users and groups, and that's data that's collected during the smart state analysis phase. So you can get access to those values. Next slide. All right, so this is the one Gregg B referred to. This was the big one for me, getting the distributed switches into the database now allows us to pull that information during the provisioning workflow from the database like we do all the other data that's displayed there. The issue here is that when you start a provision request, that can come from anywhere. UI worker a lot of times, REST API, services, they can all be running different zones somewhere different than where the actual provider is sitting. So previously, to get the distributed switches, we had to actually connect to the live provider that can cause. So the issues there really long load times, depending on where that workflow gets initiated. To ensure that we didn't keep hitting the provider, we had to cache all of the data and then just figure out what to display depending on what hosts were in play for the provision workflow. And then, we definitely run into customers that would hit timeouts, or one that's probably missing in here is we've even seen the session size blow up past the 1 meg limit of mem cache, and then the workflow just failed. So just a number of issues that were caused by trying to be performant with collecting this data and retaining it, but all that really goes away. And so now we can just hit the database, pull those values. If it starts from the UI or automate wherever, it's just a database hit. So it's much cleaner, much nicer. There's still probably a little bit of cleanup we can do in the back end, but this doesn't really change anything. Nobody should see any difference. It's really just a really nice performance improvement and
wasn't this a hack that we put
quality of life issue for me?
Wasn't it like something that we put in a few years ago to be kind of corrected shortly?
Yeah, I think we figured 2010. We kind of added support for these for and then
we didn't have time that sprint to finish it, so we kind of said hopefully next sprint will be done.
It was 6 years of technical debt. It's I believe there's still a little more out there to clean up. All right. So James got that in. Thank you, James and Gregg B. I'm really happy to see this one get in.
Yeah, me too.
Next slide. This is Ansible. So for Ansible, within the automate modeling, we added wait for IP method and state into our state machine there. So obviously Ansible's talking to live systems. Provisioning is not enough. We need to make sure that the system is up and can be contacted. So we added that helper method in there. And on the server side, just some back-end support for being able to generate the service dialogues, which will be coming into the UI next sprint, as well as from the automate side, processing the fields coming in from those dialogues, as well as allowing somebody to set those the properties that you're going to pass to the job template from the automate method, as well as the limit, right? The limits defining what machines are going to be processed as part of that job template. So now all of that can be set through the automate side. I think that is it. Over to Dennis, I believe.
Where's Dennis?
Maybe. So to add the sprint, we had a little less activity than the last sprint. 3 bugs, 2 refactors, and 5 enhancements. So I think we'll probably see same thing, more performance bugs fixed this sprint, hopefully. Next slide, please. I'm going to call a couple of them out. So the first one we discovered a thread leak related to DRB. It's rather interesting because it's been there since about 4550. We found it. Okay, we found it because the QE has started using Grafana to look at real-time stats or telemetry for the appliance. And when doing a workload, one of the workloads, one of the graphs just jumped out. There were about 7,000 threads leaked during the run. That was fixed in the automate test, and after the run, the next run was down. There were about 60 threads still leaked. They're not in that area anymore, so I'm going to look through other parts of the code that are using DRB and see if we have the same issue there. But that was a big one. They may be lightweight threads, but they add up and there's several thousand of them. Another one was actually came from a customer. The capture of data was failing. It was actually some bad data in the database. We had some orphan VMs that were in there. They got fixed by fixing the database with a script. However, then the code was updated, so we won't create those orphans anymore. They were cloud provider related. So I'll keep it from happening in the future. The last one is there was a change made in the request workflow. There was some of the validation that was being done on some of the fields required trips through RBAC when in reality it didn't really have to happen. And going through RBAC is kind of heavy. The one test that was done, the test went from about a 10-minute time to display the UI to about 4 minutes. So that was a substantial improvement. Next slide, and over to Oleg.
All right, so that concludes the sprint demo for this time round. If there's any questions, you guys can type them into the BlueJeans chat or ask them on the phone here.
So, Gregg, McCullough, I think you have a question in the chat about VDS.
I thought I answered it, but we're going to repeat it. The
Okay,
question
I'm
is,
sorry, maybe I just missed it.
how often will it refresh in the database?
Oh, you did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My bad.
Yeah, people may not have heard it, so let me repeat it. The question was on the VDS stuff. How often will it refresh in the database if a new port group is created in the VDS? How will CloudForms know about it? And the reply was, Gregg B said, if VMware emits an event, when those are created, we will see the event perform a refresh immediately. And I answered in a similar way, same way it does for the rest of the inventory. The EMS refresh gets triggered typically from events emitted from vSphere. Any other questions? All right, well, it's been an awesome sprint, and I'm really looking forward to releasing the Darga release candidate this week, and focusing next sprint on really stabilizing that, so that when Darga comes out in June, it'll be a good experience for our users. All right, thank you very much.